Welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Podcast Show. I'm coming to you from the North Shore of Oahu, where weekly I interview some of the world's most inspiring people from business, philanthropy, and entertainment. I love collecting humans, and these are some of my favorites I've found along the way. This podcast is brought to us by Capita Financial Network.
Do you need help with the next steps of your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call or schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.
Hi, welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Podcast Show. Today we have the inspiring entrepreneur and co-founder of PayStand, Jeremy Almond. And Jeremy, you guys started the most impressive company that is leveraging and supporting modern internet and blockchain and SaaS technologies to help transform the B2B payment structure. So Jeremy, you've had an amazing journey as an entrepreneur building $1 billion company, which, again, unicorn status. You're one of the few, as most entrepreneurs, as my dad would say, are entrenched in manure. Most of us do not have this happy fairy tale ending, but congratulations. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your story, the services you guys are providing, how you're changing the world. And I'm really excited to talk to you about your personal passion. You mentioned the foundation, PayStand.org, and your personal family office philanthropy, because as you know, Jeremy, from our brief introduction, my heart is always about, how we make our life about purpose and giving back, because it's a life worth living. So Jeremy, thanks again for coming on the show, and share us whatever you'd like to about your background and story.
Oh, what an honor, Lindsay. Just, you have incredible guests on, so it's an honor to just hang out and share a cup of coffee with you, so to speak, and the listeners. I never would have expected to be here, talking as a CEO of a company that's, been reasonably successful. My story is I've been involved in tech since I was a teenager, so it's just quite a long time now. But it's really kind of an unexpected story. My father was a blue collar construction worker, never went to college. My mother's side of the family immigrated from Mexico right before I was born. And so the fact that I live outside of the ghetto and don't work in the fields, itself is just this wildly crazy thing to me, to be able to choose what I get to do in my life, to be able to have impact in the world, and even talk with people like you about purpose and, the skills that we're given to be able to, move the needle. Is an honor. And so today my day job is I'm the CEO of a company called PayStand. It's the largest and fastest growing business-to-business payment network. In one sense, it's highly unsexy, but it should be something familiar to most people, which is, imagine what a Venmo or PayPal does for consumers, making something as important to our economy as the money movement happen. We do for big companies, and we help them drive the spirit of the economy forward. And we help them do it in a much more efficient way, which helps those companies be more competitive. So they don't have to use existing kind of broken, I would argue, corrupt financial systems like the banks or Visa and MasterCard, and instead can make their businesses more productive and more profitable. And so, today we process about $10 billion in payment volume. We have 1 million businesses on the platform, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to go public. And so, that's an honor. And then, I get to do some other cool stuff beyond that. So it keeps me busy.
Amazing, Jeremy. Okay, so you have Mexican heritage. Is that what I heard you say?
I do, though I'm reminded from that side of the family that I'm a super gringo because, I have blue eyes for those of you who are only listening. And, I have the complexion, I guess, of my dad. And so, it doesn't matter if I have a house down in Mexico and have a big part of my companies down there. I don't know which world I live in. Am I super American, super gringo? Do I have my Latino heritage? It's a fun world.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually, why you would have such open awareness and aperture to be sensitive about financial inclusion. You would kind of, recognizing what you're doing with your philanthropy. So tell me a little bit, number one, when you mentioned that companies can save money using your platform, using your services, How does that work? And when you mentioned like the corruption of traditional financial industries, can you educate some of us? Because some of us, we take things for granted. Like, I use whatever systems are available and I don't know the impact that it may or may not have. And maybe is it only at scale that you really see these problems? Maybe you can educate us for the layperson how you're solving a real pain point there.
Yeah. What the company does is today, most businesses in the kind of real economy, they effectively still use paper checks, which I don't remember the last time you and I used that in the real world. Maybe my grandpa did or something, or they use something that was born before the internet, like wires or ACH. These are very old infrastructure, and so they send out large invoices, and it's a very manual process, and they have humans and they have cost. So it's a very expensive process, and so we come in and we modernize all of their revenue, which is like the lifeblood of their business, and so that's really, really helpful. If they can get their money faster, they can be more competitive, they can be more capital efficient. Just like, sending Venmo back and forth between you and your friends is a radically better experience than, buying beers for your friends and then having to send them a check, a month later or whatever. So the company does a very, very utilitarian, mission critical part of the business. Though I'll be honest, I think I'm a big fan that entrepreneurship should align to something that, because it's so freaking hard, that you really want to, chew glass, so to speak, run through walls. It's something that's going to take you a decade plus to build anything meaningful. And the reality is, when I was 12, the last thing I thought I was going to do is build a big B2B payment company. Like, it sounds so freaking boring. But I think what I believe is that, oftentimes what makes us alive as people is this notion that, like, where our careers and our skill sets align, where our mission and purpose align, is where we do our best work. And so I call that calling. And for me, you heard a little bit about my family story, and one of the parts of my family story was, my family lived paycheck by paycheck. Like kind of many Americans, they had two pieces of the American dream. One, to see their kid do better than themselves, which, I was very blessed to be able to do. And two, to build wealth, which most Americans do that through, saving up for 10, 15, 20 years and buying a home. And so my family did that. They worked their butts off to be able to, do the construction, work in the fields, buy an 800 square foot home, 1-bedroom home, but it was like their pride and joy. And then in 2008, they were one of the many millions of Americans through a very, very tragic, longer story. They lost their home. And, I just remember there was this thing called Occupy Wall Street, which probably the young kids don't remember, but it was this like kind of rioting in the streets, this idea that, like, why is it that, the 1% get bailed out and the rest don't? Why is it that Wall Street kind of can continue doing what they're doing? And there's really very few repercussions, but Main Street gets hurt. And so it was this idea that we need to democratize the most important part of our system, the economic system. And so that was the fire that started this view for me of rethinking the financial system. And so I became very early in something called Bitcoin and blockchain, which 14 years ago was this very nascent concept that creating financial and economic freedom is an empowerment vehicle for people, companies, economies, and maybe even governments. And the current system doesn't work for us. And so, I think our company represents kind of a boring side of a bigger movement of people rethinking how the financial system works. And so, my friends that work at, Stanford and Berkeley and are trying to burn down the banking system, they have probably a more extreme view, which is, we should move to something else. But we have a more practical view, which is, hey, if you create better underlying infrastructure that's fair, it creates more impact for companies, more impact for employees, more impact for consumers, and that's good for our GDP. And then that's ultimately good for, people to have financial mobility.
Amazing. And that makes so much sense. Like, intuitively, I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, in your lived experience from having had, you really have like the classic, the quintessential rags to riches story from your background to have nothing and then come into everything. It warms my heart to see someone like you having ultra sensitivity and compassion to want to like give back and utilize that. Maybe that's a natural segue for you to share a little bit what you're doing from the corporate side of your corporate social responsibility in the foundation, and then also what you're passionate about on your personal level. And by the way, do you have family? Are you married? You got kids? Have you done that thing?
Yeah, I'm down that road. It's all. God, I think a lot about stewardship, right? So whether it's stewardship in the family side, or stewardship in your company side and your skills, right? Whether you run a company or whether, you're a professional, we all have skills. And, I think all of us are given to then multiply, right? And so, I think about that at the company level. The reality is, look, banks have let us down at the most fundamental level, but beyond that, like you don't think about financial services as ones that are a deeply open giver, right? You almost think of it the other way around. You think about Wall Street as generally greedy, corrupt, unfair, and so one of the things that became important to me is our core mission at the company on the .com, the capital side, is about democratizing financial services. Well, we needed to walk that walk beyond just the company side, and so my view was companies can have they can be dual impact in their nature. The capitalism itself can actually be a noble calling, because the reality is a lot of nonprofits that Lindsay, you and I probably spend time with on our personal side. They struggle with sustainability. And so our view was, boy, if we could take our corporate mission and then touch to places that we have the bottom of the pyramid where companies don't have any incentive to help, wouldn't that be cool? And so for us, financial inclusion is the natural impact area for us because we serve the top of the pyramid, we serve large enterprise. But then if we can give back to the bottom of the pyramid where banks, where other entities generally don't support because it's not profitable, that's a huge opportunity. And so for us, what paystand.org does is we enable sort of circular economies in the least of these in financially underrepresented areas, both in the US and in the global South, particularly in Latin America. And so, we enable Bitcoin education, financial inclusion in places like El Salvador. We now support a program called My First Bitcoin that supports almost 3 million kids. We support, large towns that have been transformed, that have gone from sort of sustenance building towns to thriving, areas like Bitcoin Beach or El Zonte. We're the primary backers of things like the Human Rights Foundation, which takes financial inclusion tools for folks that have either been human trafficked or, are part of systemic abuse in places like Peru and South America, and gives them the tools to be able to get out of those situations, and then the economic ability to be able to live in wherever they're rehomed. And so these are all areas that I think are left behind, but our company has core competency in financial tools in general. And so to be able to reapply those back with Bitcoin is a really powerful vehicle. And, I'd say where we see an enormous amount of life. So.
Well, wow. That's so stunning. So Jeremy, just to understand the structure. So as you generate profit, as your company's moving into, it sounds like a potential IPO, which would be so exciting. And you're able to then take some of those resources, allocate a certain amount of tax exempt resources towards these programs. Are you operating the programs, or are you basically grant writers in partnership with people that are on the ground, boots on the ground? Because that can be a radically different position, right?
Yeah. So I guess I'd say three things there. And, this is a learning lesson for me. I didn't grow up in a place where I could do this kind of stuff. So it's a really fun journey. But so a couple of things I would say. One, I think I have the view that typical corporate, social responsibility, CSR, is oftentimes just a token activity. And I think that unfortunately a lot of companies, they have good intentions, but just, giving away 1% of some profit, like stored somewhere in some other country, that you just write a check and you walk away. Like, it's nice, but I think we can do better. And so, we actually said we believe in the kind of giving principle that humans ought to do, which is tithing. So we actually it was a very interesting pitch that I had to do to the board for about a year, but I said it's important for us to put kind of in our founding sort of infrastructure that we give 10% of every dollar that comes through our business needs to go back to the bottom of the pyramid. And I believe by doing that multiplying effect, it has, positive impact to the company. But we do it with no agenda. So, for us, it's not about marketing. For a couple of years, we actually operated where we did it completely anonymously because we really wanted, impact was our currency. Our belief was if we could go take our resources and go change lives and change communities, that was way, way more important than some stupid marketing doc that, McDonald's or Visa is going to do. And so that's worked enough that we started talking about it maybe 6 months ago, because it's now reaching, a scale that we're touching, nation states and stuff like that, which is pretty cool for a little company. And so the way it works now is, yes, we do grant writing, but we do it generally at the grassroots level. So these are generally programs that are not, sort of large established 501(c)(3)s. They're usually, what we're finding is at the bottom of the pyramid, these grassroots programs are very, underdeveloped and under-resourced. And so the grant writing is part of the process, but the other probably more significant part of the process is we help those organizations scale, where many of the programs we're involved in, they're doing really incredible work in one location, but they might not be aware that same kind of work is happening, let's say in one town in El Salvador, that same activity is happening, in another township in Africa. And so how can we, connect the resources, and create scale for those organizations? And so we think of it as like we're not the ones that light the fire, but those are small little kindling that's running in the woods, and we want to turn them into forest fires that, change the world. So,
Jeremy, I have a leadership career crush on you. I mean, tithing is actually, as a woman trying to follow Jesus in the world as best I can, that tithing concept comes from my faith, and I've paid it my whole life. And I just love that you're doing that's radical, almost reckless abundance and generous as a corporation. I'm so impressed. How is it that you were able to get the shareholders, the board members to do that? It's one thing. Are you that significant a shareholder you could just unilaterally make that decision, or is that the culture you built? That's stunning to me.
Yeah. I think it's on leaders to lead us to more. So I believe in the notion of Garden City, right? The work we do, if we're privileged enough to work in tech or work in business, what a privileged life, right? We're born in this unique period in the world where, if we were born 10,000 years in any direction, in any other continent or whatever, life would have been a lot harder. And so I really believe that we have a privilege and a duty to live beyond ourselves. And so I think about that in leadership because I do represent shareholders. It'd be nice if I owned 100% of the company, but I don't. But we have shareholders or employees, we have investors, we have VCs, we have large pension funds. And my view is taking that group towards the best versions of multiplying, of the notion of fishes and loaves, is part of my calling as a leader. And I believe that it can set the stage for how the world can operate. Whether we're a garbage person, we're making the world beautiful by picking up garbage every day, or whether you're the CEO of a financial company who can look at where is finance broken and where can that impact the people who are left behind. That truly is our calling, each one of us. And so it's on us to kind of bring everybody into the tent. And I think I believe it's where the world is moving in terms of capitalism. Capitalism gets a bad rap, but it's really, to me, about incentive alignment. And my incentive alignment is impact that changes the world. And so capitalism is great because the larger we are and the more successful we are. And I tell our salespeople this: for every account that you help sell, you're helping those companies. We'll oftentimes put millions of dollars back on the bottom line for the company. So we're helping those companies create more jobs and be more efficient, which is good for our country. And then you're helping create profit that then drives back to this deeper purpose. And, I think people want to we do our best when we're living that way, and so whether that's, an investor who's super wealthy, but, goes, what am I going to do with my life? Like I have people on our cap table who are much more successful than me, and they're kind of like curious what the next arc of their career is. And me, like I literally don't care about money, power, fame. Like I would do the job for free, like just get me coffee, and I'm going to do it because I believe like it's part of my currency and my purpose. And I really hope most people get a chance to do that in their lives, because you live so fulfilled if you do.
That is so inspiring. I hope listeners, whatever purview we each have, or get inspired to say there are ways we can stop and take inventory of, as you said, our personal stewardship and see how we can just do more, how we can be more creative. I love what you said. I actually am, as a consultant in philanthropy the last decade, I had a boutique agency, and we were a one-stop shop for social good. And we helped, multinational corporations, NGOs. We helped ultra high net worth families, a lot of A-list celebrities with their giving. And there was always this tension where they're like, I don't want to be, like when you said in the beginning, you were kind of anonymous. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be seen as virtue signaling. I just want to do this for the right reasons, which I'm like, those are the people that the world should know are doing good. Because what I mean, it's like, of course they don't want the credit because that's not their reason why. And yet if it's a virtuous cycle, if they can make more money, I'm shameless about this. If you can make more money doing good, then you can do more good. And so I just feel so differently. In fact, I'm going to send you, if it's okay, an unsolicited private screener of a documentary I made called Uncharitable. I don't know if you've ever seen the TED Talk by Dan Pallotta called The Way We Think of Charity is Dead Wrong. I don't know if you've seen that.
Send it to me. I'd love it.
It's all about like not demonizing overhead and a lot of the strategies and levers we use in the private sector, like paying the best talent, taking risk, spending money on marketing, all the things that are seen as overhead and demonized and nonprofit. Yet we know those are like critical pieces to scale in business. And so we've asked the nonprofit sector to solve the greatest societal ills with the cheapest available Band-Aid with both arms tied behind your back. And we wonder why we're not getting a lot done. So it makes my heart sing to see someone with your business acumen and your heart come together, because like you said, you mentioned Patagonia before we started, and kind of as kind of a case study of what you're trying to do. And I love that because people, when they think of Patagonia, like I was literally down horseback riding in Patagonia and climbing glaciers and doing all this magic stuff. And I thought, that brand, because it was everywhere, everyone was wearing it, right? I literally just associate it with preserving our beautiful planet. Like I didn't think of it as an apparel company. I didn't think of it as retail. I didn't think of it as like, all I thought of was the association I have with the brand. And that is a good thing, because when I go to buy something, I'd rather go to them who have that kind of ethos. I'd rather them be the stewards, to use your word. So Jeremy, I love this conversation.
I think one of the things, like, giving yourself the place to be able to find, where your unique calling is in the world is, this really cool journey, right? So you read Yvonne's book and he talks about his story to get there. And I think you have to get to a place where you get beyond Maslow's hierarchy of survival before you can do it. But once you do, I think going through the rat race and the circle, people want to live missionally. Like, I really think that, like, young people, millennials and Gen Z, that's what they're looking for. And I think all of us like that way up, but you got to get there. So, I think my story of getting there was, I was at a startup that was, very early. I was a late teenage in the .com days, and I was at this company that started really small. And then, ultimately went public and became a global company or whatever, and I had this like process in my life where I went, wow, what does a kid who has nothing all of a sudden experience like the muchness of the world? I kind of had my midlife crisis, I guess, at like, 22, which is like, what a cool, crazy, lucky experience. And I remember watching, a lot of folks later in their career. So I was this crazy guy with, a tech and engineering background, who was at the startup, who just kind of got lucky. But I watched a lot of really amazing, smart business leaders around me. And one of the things that was surprising is, they're at an arc in their career, where after success, it was clear they didn't know quite what to do. So it was like, what do you do when you buy your sports car? What do you do when you buy your second house? And, you're not totally fulfilled. And that really sent me on this journey because I was, I'd moved from California to New York. I was working in Wall Street at the time. And I watched this period where I went from chasing to now what? And I got lucky enough. A kind of crazy part of my story was I ended up on a small boat. Like I decided to just sell everything I had. I originally was going to sail from New York back to California. I'd never sailed on a boat before, so I thought that sounded like a good idea to give it a go. It's a very long story. That's a totally different podcast. But the short thing was there was a period where I ended up crossing from Patagonia, actually, just down past Panama. I was in the Galapagos, and then I went across all of the Pacific. And the Pacific's like really big. Like, as a kid who doesn't know much, like wow. I didn't realize how big that blue was. It's like a huge on the map. And I was out to sea for like a couple months where like you don't see land, and you're on this like little tiny boat. And in the process for me, you're talking about your Patagonia experience. I was literally like fishing every day to survive because you're out in the middle of the ocean, and then catching rainwater to be able to drink. Okay. And you do this every day, and you start getting into a routine. And what I realized out of that process was I was chasing all of my life, and I didn't really because if you grow up with nothing or little, you feel like you need to like fill something. But the world is actually filled with abundance because every day there was food in the ocean, and every day there was water that came from the sky. And every day, that which I needed, I had. And that's really changed my mindset because once you know that abundance is true and that you can be part of it, you get into a world of making and creating as opposed to a world of taking and surviving. And that allows you to kind of do what you're called to do, which is just so much fun. So.
Oh, it's so beautiful, Jeremy. Reminds me of a phrase that I've been trying to remind myself, a mantra that I'm really trying to deeply embody, which is that I should know the difference between doing things from love and for love. When you have this posture of the world that needs are going to be met, I'm okay. It's all happening for me. That surrender, that like abundance feeling, you really make different decisions. It really changes your lived experience, in the moment. And generally just has radically different, better outcomes. So I love what you're saying. So Jeremy, on a personal level, given that you have this beautiful spirit and purview to the world, what is it that you do is it separate in your personal giving, your personal philanthropy? Do you kind of view that as, I see what you built there with this incredible ecosystem, this, like you said, a virtuous cycle. But in your personal stewardship, do you venture out into different kinds of things? What other kinds of things are you passionate about supporting or doing or being a part of, even as an investor privately or whatever?
Yeah. So PayStand.org is the corporate vehicle, but at a personal level, I think about my story, and by the grace of God, in so many ways, like it's crazy to be here, and so I think about how do I enable more of my story for others, because for me, I think a long time. I'm an engineer, like my background, I'm an introvert. So like, I don't love going up and speaking and doing a lot of my story, but, I've been encouraged over time that like, until you see others who've done it, you might not know. And so I've been spending a lot of time at the personal level now looking, at folks who haven't been given a chance, and then how do you enable them? So one of the programs I'm involved with is called Digital Nest, which helps kind of kids like me where they grew up, kids of farm migrants, or they grew up, in historically underrepresented areas in the ghetto, and help educate them through technology, through education, through scholarships, because there are brilliant people who just, haven't had the chance to sort of get out. You want to give them the chance. And so Digital Nest is a super cool program I'm involved with. There's another set of activity I do because, I'm the company's fairly involved in Latin America, both at the company level and the nonprofit. So I spent a lot of time there with entrepreneurs and young people, again, trying to create sponsorship for them to be able to kind of break out. Because I believe Silicon Valley now, I'm sitting in Silicon Valley. I'm very blessed to kind of be at the nexus of everything in technology. But Silicon Valley, in a sense, is being distributed and decentralized. And so, a kid in Mexico or a kid, in Chile or Colombia, should be able to have a shot to go change the world as well. And so I do a lot of, investing, in young entrepreneurs that my view is, I don't really care about return. What I care about is just creating more. And for me, I look back at my life, and just a few people believing in me had a huge impact. So my dad didn't ever go to college, had no frame of reference for this world, but told me I could do anything. That had a huge impact. I had a teacher who I was bused. I was a part of some, ghetto school bus program where I was bused like an hour and a half to go to a better high school when I was a kid. And I had a teacher who believed in me, who thought a kid who sounded a little different, he looked a little different, could potentially, go off to university and get out. And so that teacher had a big impact on me. And then when I was at a startup, it was like 17. I called the founder up and I said, hey, I hear you guys are like the cool startup. Like, I'll sweep your floors and I'll take out the trash if you kind of let me hang around. And, that founder took a bet on me, and, I watched incredible leadership around me. And so I look at people who took bets on me, and they were very discrete, small moments, but they had huge pivot points in my life. And, so I think, if we have a chance to be able to, that last company I was at, that startup, I think it birthed something like, we checked at one point, like 500 other companies, like once that company went public and was successful and whatever. And so, that's literally multiplying. And so, I think if at some level I can, be involved in seeing other entrepreneurs succeed, especially underrepresented ones, that gives me a lot of joy, and just watching, others flourish. So
do you kind of invest in certain verticals that like, do you try to stay to your lane, or do you try to be pretty driven by, the jockey instead of the horse? You bet on, the leadership, or just stuff that interests you that you want to be involved in? Or how do you pick? Because there's a lot of people listening that are investors.
Yeah.
And I think somebody like you that's, has probably quite a level of liquidity that maybe everybody doesn't have. You probably get a lot of pitches. You probably get a lot of offers. How do you pick what you give to invest in, take a bet on?
Yeah. I mean, so one of the benefits to me when you talk about the jockey is, by my focus on, what I'd call underdog founders, or even whether it's a founder, or even sometimes earlier, if it's somebody who, we're helping with scholarship, go to college, who you're gonna, like, one day they're gonna be it. Like, I'm a big believer, like, grit, it's really, really hard to teach in someone. Like, you're kind of born with it because of your upbringing. And so I believe in people who can punch above their weight. And so, like, I actually, I'm not a big fan of, like, traditional DEI, because I think that's like, it's almost like token giving, versus, like, I actually believe, like, people who have underdog personalities are naturally going to punch above their weight. So they're actually better investments. And so because of that, it's like, that person has so much of a chip on their shoulder, they're going to run through a wall to be able to, like, prove somebody wrong. Like, you're, no offense, but, like, your average kid who's, like, fifth generation, who went to Harvard, like, it's a lot harder. It occasionally happens, but it's a lot harder to have that kind of chip on your shoulder. And so, I look at that first and foremost, because I think if you have that, like, starting things, whether it's a nonprofit or a company or a movement, it starts with defying gravity, moving a rock up a hill. And if that person doesn't have the ability to move the rock up the hill, it falls straight back down. But the person who has the personality in them to do that, like, they're unstoppable. Now, what I often find, the part I get to help with is, an angel investor or somebody who helps with scholarships and things like that, is helping navigate them towards highest leverage, activities. So, for example, a lot of entrepreneurs in the global South that I work with, they'll say, I want to be the PayPal of Mexico, or the Uber of Africa, or something like that. And when I try to open up their aperture and go, like, you can be bigger than that. Like let's take your energy and effort and actually like have a bigger aperture. And so, I spent a lot of my background as in B2B and in SaaS and in fintech. And so I tend to gravitate towards those areas. But what I'm mostly interested in is, high grit individuals, with high aptitude who are going to punch above their weight. And then are they in areas that, those people can be the most high leverage as opposed to, sort of small fish in a small pond.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great kind of left, right limits, and makes a lot of sense. I think personally, I had a mentor who kind of always said that the rarest commodity are high capacity and high character human beings, like humanoids, like people whose souls are just wired for, because sometimes you get people that are really competent, but they don't have the character. And when you can find those two in a Venn diagram, and then those are the treasures of this life, in my opinion. So finding like people that just really get it. And I do believe most humans are doing the best they can. I think generally it's very few that have just like given into corruption and just, like full-heartedly, or just, a lost cause in terms of pure evil. I think most people are trying to do the best they can, and we have our own amalgamation, our own wounding, our insecurities, our problems, our purviews, our whatever our capacities are and limitations. But there is a skill set in picking the high capacity, high character people, because sometimes it can be a little subtle. But there's some great tells. So my mentor, he actually grew the largest, is the Chicago Research and Trading firm. He was the largest options trader in history. His name was Joe Rich. And Joe took these analysts from Wall Street, and he looked at like the CEOs of publicly traded companies, and they looked at qualitatively, which in clusters becomes quantitative, the character of these CEOs. And he invested in it. It was called the Missouri Fund. My friend Dan Cooper and him started this, and they, out of 2,600 publicly traded companies that they surveyed, there was only about 1% that had high character, high capacity based on qualitative information. Like, how do they treat their spouse? How do they treat their secretary? What is their corporate social responsibility purview? What kind of diversity and inclusion? What kind of enemies do they have? Do they value other people's time and their lives? Do they, what kind of sensitivities they have as an individual? And what's interesting is that portfolio outperformed the S&P and the Dow by like 30%. So that's pretty phenomenal and like evidence about what we're talking about. So I love how you see that. I love how you get that. So Jeremy, what are the things you're most excited about? I mean, here you are, you've got this juggernaut, you've got this tiger by its tail. Are you still, have you built a system where you are working more on the business than in the business? Are you able to enjoy life more? Have you been able to extrapolate yourself in a way where you can, swim in lakes and do more fishing and on the great big blue ocean? Are you still, is it just in your wiring to constantly build? Because I find that a lot of my most competent friends, they're golf for a week and are like, I am so bored. I love the ones that turn that into like economic cranks that help more people have resources, or like philanthropy type initiatives. So, but everything's okay. It's all a personal journey, right? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I got lucky enough that I got to, experience part of that, learn, earn, and return cycle when I was a bit younger. And I thought at some point when I was sailing, I'm like, I'm a surfer, is like my version of golf. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to like post up on an island and, there's like a perfect surf spot and build my hut, and I'm like done. And I was just like, I found that spot, and I was like amazing. And then I was just like, what am I doing?
Where was your surf spot? My husband and my boys are all surfers. I surf. I surf too, but I'm not.
Yeah, I do surf a lot in Mexico. I have a place down there, but no, there's some magic undiscovered places in the middle of the ocean. Let's just say that are like, documentaries will get written about them one day. But I think. So I'm not a believer in this concept of work-life balance, where like, they're like, it's almost like a concept to me of like, I do my like capitalism and then I give, and they're like totally different sides of my life. Like, okay, like I turn my work off and then I go like home and serve for family or whatever. Like I believe in integrated life, because I believe when we have integrated life, we do our best work, and then we're most inspired. And so everything I do pretty hardcore. and I feel the most inspired by doing it. And I just think, okay, well, how do I multiply more? And so for me, right now, that allows me, I'm in a bit of a glide plane with the business where, I have a really good executive staff. It's really important as a company grows. It gets to a stage where in early stages, what really matters is like survivalship, product market fit, like, building the right thing that serves customers. Then there's like a scaling stage, how do you make it repeatable? And then there's a stage where, when you're getting to a certain place, a lot of what matters is the leadership and, is a company headed in the right direction. And so, we have an incredible COO and CRO and CFO now. And that allows me to work on the business instead of in the business. Still sometimes I get pulled in, but, I think more about like my background, my partnership with the C-level is, am I, setting where the boat's going? Am I making sure we're measuring the right things? Are we doing the micro changes? And then that allows them to be able to own more of the business, which is great. And so by doing that, that allows me, I'd say, to look at a wider level of the category work we're doing that's beyond the company. And we're in a really privileged place where I think we're working on a category that as is interesting as one of the biggest human technology changes in history. So Bitcoin and blockchain, for those who are less familiar with it, I would say it's got the potential to impact society as much as the printing press did, as much as, the invention of democracy did, and as much as the invention of the internet did, right? These are huge catalyzing events for society. What this allows is a lot of fundamental things that are broken in society, whether it's money or wars or politics or tribalism. A lot of that comes down to fundamental problems in our economic system. So the notion that there is a democratically different, untouchable, completely safe financial system that, the refugee in Ukraine or Russia, both together, can use to escape oppression, that, the person that's sitting in El Salvador that has no access to banks, or the person in Turkey that has 200% inflation, or the person in Cuba who has government repression. Each one of those is now, for the first time in human history, has access to this thing that's independent, that allows them to be able to store their assets and their wealth, that's portable, that's outside of government control, and it's outside of corruption, most importantly. And the world works great until it doesn't. And so having an alternative is really, really important. And so, I think what we get to be involved with is stuff that's a little bigger than the company now. And so we're helping governments, large entities, in places that are very, very dangerous, look a little more democratically free. And boy, is that cool. So.
Wow, that's really cool, Jeremy. So are you working mostly with heads of state or the ministers of finance, or kind of both? Or?
Yeah, and what's been fascinating about this journey is oftentimes it starts at the grassroots level. So programs that will support at the grassroots level. So I'll take El Salvador, for example. El Salvador was the first country to go sovereign currency in Bitcoin. It went from the most dangerous country in the Americas by murder rate to now the safest. It did that in a 5-year circle. There's a lot written about the news that, I would say, go look at the data, not the news. The places went from, I traveled a lot over the world. It was one of the scariest places. I would not take a family 5 years ago, to a place that's, safer and funner than Costa Rica. Why? Well, it started with a single donation by a single person that both was involved in the church, was effectively a missionary, and also involved in Bitcoin, and said, hey, I'm going to give a completely universal basic income to a small fishing village in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to do it with no agenda, and I'm going to see what happens. That changed the city, which then changed the state, which then the government got involved and went, this is pretty cool, and it changed the nation. People think it was from the political side. It actually, good politicians just follow the movements. So it started at grassroots, and then now, it's at the nation state, at the president level. So now we get the chance to work with, whether it's them or other nation state leaders, where we're quite involved in a number of them. But I'm reminded that it actually starts at the grassroots, and then you look at good leadership, and you help them hopefully, multiply what's going on in the grassroots level. And so now the company's at a place where we can, provide a little bit of guidance to, nation states or, the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Economy or the Minister of Education who's trying to use some of these programs in their countries. But I think we have, some level of expertise of that because of both, what our corporate side does and also just literally what we see real change happen in, at the grassroots level. So
that's so stunning, Jeremy. I know a little bit about this because I spent the last 8 years in the cockpit, so to speak, of Joe Ritchie, and he was the chairman of the Economic Development Board of Rwanda after the genocide there. And he lifted the GDP in partnership with President Kagame by 12% in less than a decade. As in Singapore, we haven't seen that kind of economic growth. And I'm curious because we've been mentoring, advising, and supporting government leaders in Eswatini, Malawi, Guatemala. I mean, it's just stunning to me how, again, when you find high capacity, high character leadership, like you said, they follow the movement. They do what's best for them. They care more about their country than themselves. And as jaded as we can be about politics, even in corruption in the developed world, there are incredible leaders that are just amazing out there. You have to look for them, but you cherry pick those leaders, and like the scriptures talk about getting behind the man or woman of peace. That's who we find, and then we support them. I would love to talk with you. I'll find a little more about that because we are working with ministers of finance in many of these countries, and you'd be a godsend to connect with them. But I'm curious, how did when this generous individual went in, it was El Salvador, you said?
Yeah.
It just enabled this funding. How did they end up, and this is kind of the last little question, but how did they end up not creating enablement at that scale? Because that's an entire economy, right? I mean, we look at what happened. I mean, as a negative case study, 75% more than the GDP poured into Haiti after their earthquake from foreign aid, and absolutely demolished the infrastructure of that country. Because, I mean, just imagine, we know people go bankrupt, 75% of the people. I think this is a statistic in the 70 percentile of people who win the lottery go bankrupt within 5 years.
Totally.
It's a good thing to come in and just hand someone who has no quote unquote skills for that stewardship. How did you avoid that? And how have you guys avoided that?
I think a couple of things. First, the story you're talking about, Joe, he spoke at my church one time, and it was really cool to see. And whether it was his story or the story of El Salvador, the thing that's reminding me first is one single person, whoever's listening, a single person's listening to their calling can literally change the world. That's not a trite statement. I've personally watched singular individuals move nation states, which you don't think that that's true until you actually see it. And then it really changes your mindset that you talk about surrender, singular surrender to calling literally can, feed 10,000, can change a nation, can change a city, just by singular surrender and then stepping out, right? Joe did that. This individual did that. Now, I think one of the things that's so powerful to me about what's happening in the Bitcoin movement that's particularly, mirrors missionary movement and mirrors, the democratic principles, I think of, the 1700s is this notion that by giving people their own individual choice and accountability can break the cycle of dependency. So the unique thing that happened in this case that I think is a case study for community development that's going to change how community development works. The individual said, so he lived in two worlds. He kind of lived in the missionary world, but then was a business person who was super early into Bitcoin. And he was like, I keep hearing about these principles of freedom money and financial inclusion and all this stuff, but all I know is rich people who are holding the money somewhere and just wanting the price to go up. And he's like, that's not actually why it was started. It was started as a movement against the corruption of money, which turns out to be a big deal. And so his singular request to this small township was, hey, I'm going to give a form of UBI, but that universal basic income for a year is only going to come if you keep it in Bitcoin. And that catalyzing movement, what happened was it created a barter economy because what happened was the initial teenagers, these were kids, these were I interviewed one of them. It was one of the first 4 kids who got it. He was an 18-year-old at the time. He said, Jeremy, my most likely course was either I was going to be a fisherman, that was best case scenario, or I was going to join a gang because there's no jobs here, there's no sort of access out, and then I was going to get into drugs, and I was going to get into crime, and I was going to like be in jail. Like that was my story. And by giving them a tool that was an economic incentive, it forced them to learn something, right? Because if you have this kind of digital money thing that's semi outside of the government, it taught them to learn technology. It taught them to learn a little bit of English. It taught them to look at the world a little bit more globally. And then because the only way to use it was to barter with people, it taught them actually how to work at core economic principles that don't have to deal with money printing. And so that catalyzed the entire town started multiplying across. And so it forced a level of financial sophistication in that town that's higher than most people who are living paycheck by paycheck in America. Like they understand what inflation rates are. They understand what currency rates are. They understand like, okay, what my savings rate needs to be, all because they had a instrument that created an incentive for them to learn.
Yes.
And so I think about that a lot because nowadays, what's happened out of it, the outcomes are higher level of education, higher level of jobs, higher level of technology, higher level of financial mobility. But the input was not a singular white knight donation. Instead, the input was something that gave people the power to actually change their own lives. And that has been incredible for me to watch, that Bitcoin can be that kind of instrument. But it's also incredible to watch that a singular individual can be a catalyst for entire country change.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. And I love that you started off with that spiritual mantle, because if you're leaning into something that's that's metaphysical, then you kind of can't mess up. But so Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the show, and you're just a delight. I'm so thrilled to have met you today. Thank you for all the good you're doing. I'm excited to do some more offline follow-up calls to see how we can get up to good together. So I appreciate you.
What an honor. Thank you, listeners, for hearing from us for a little bit. And, if you want to follow anything on my side, you can follow me at Twitter at Jeremy Almond or LinkedIn. If you have anything that you want to follow up with, I'm easy to reach. I have a podcast that talks about Bitcoin and blockchain for, governments and, institutions and businesses called Redefined. And then if you're interested in the foundation work, PayStand.org is the place to do that. So, what an honor to spend a little bit of time with you, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Do you need help with the next steps for your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call to schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at www.capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.